something in the Pacific made a sound too loud to be alive. In 1997, a line of underwater microphones caught a deep rumble rising out of the Southern Ocean. It climbed in pitch for about a minute, and then it was gone. Sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart all heard it. Nothing on Earth is that loud. Not a blue whale. Not anything anyone had ever measured. Nobody could say what made it. So they gave it a name that sounds like a joke. They called it the Bloop. During the Cold War, the United States Navy laid a secret grid of microphones across the sea floor. The system was called SOSUS, built to track Soviet submarines. When the war ended, American scientists inherited a set of ears that could hear across an entire ocean. NOAA extended that reach with an array of its own in the equatorial Pacific. The man who ran those ears was a NOAA scientist named Christopher Fox. In 1997, the ocean handed him something he could not name, but it had a shape. On a spectrogram, the Bloop draws a steep, rising curve. Sped up 16 times, it does what its name promises, a swelling, watery whoop that surfaces and vanishes. Fox's team compared when the sound reached each sensor and triangulated a source. Roughly 50 degrees south, 100 degrees west, one of the emptiest places on the planet, far west of South America. No islands, no shipping lanes, nothing there at all. So what was down there? Loud enough to be heard 5,000 kilometers away. Fox began eliminating. Not a ship. Ship noise is mechanical and steady. Not a submarine and not a bomb. He said so plainly, and he would have known. It did not look like the earthquakes and seafloor volcanoes his array was built to catalogue, but the shape was wrong in a very particular way. The Bloop swept upward in frequency. That slide, from low to high, is the signature of a living thing calling out. Animals do that. Rocks do not. In September of 2001, Fox told CNN he had a suspect, not a monster, something so ordinary, so boring, that almost nobody would ever repeat it. Remember that, because a year later, a journalist named David Wolman interviewed him for New Scientist, and Fox offered a second thought. Of all the unidentified sounds in the catalogue, he said, the Bloop is the one whose profile most resembles an animal. There was one problem, and Fox named it himself. Whatever made it would be far more powerful than the calls of any animal on Earth. So what would that have to be? Wolman printed the question that Fox's comparison invited. Is it even remotely possible, he wrote, that some creature bigger than any whale is lurking in the ocean depths? He was asking. The internet heard an answer. The scholar Philip Hayward later pinned the damage on a single word, likely. Within a few years, the Bloop had stopped being a data point and become a creature, enormous, unclassified, waiting. And readers noticed the coordinates sat in the same empty quarter of the Pacific where Lovecraft had placed his sunken city. None of that was evidence. It was a coincidence of geography wrapped around a very good story. But a very good story is a kind of gravity. For a decade, the Bloop lived in listicles and late-night forums, and on channels with millions of views, always introduced the same way. The sound science cannot explain. Fox's real best guess, the boring one, the one he had said out loud on television, was almost never repeated. It did not have teeth. While the myth grew, NOAA kept working and kept moving south. Year after year, its scientists dropped hydrophones closer to Antarctica, listening to volcanoes and earthquakes at the bottom of the world. They were not hunting a monster. They were learning the vocabulary of ice. And ice, it turns out, is deafening. When an iceberg cracks, carves, or grinds along the seabed, it releases a pulse of sound across a huge band of frequencies. In the deep sound channel, that pulse travels thousands of kilometers without dying. But could ice really be louder than a blue whale? In early 2008, an iceberg designated A53A began breaking apart near South Georgia Island. NOAA hydrophones in the Scotia Sea tracked the berg by sound alone as it disintegrated. And when they laid those recordings beside the 1997 spectrogram, the match was not vague. Icequakes, NOAA wrote, produce spectrograms very similar to the Bloop, at amplitudes detectable more than 5,000 kilometers away. The loudest voice ever recorded in the ocean had never had a mouth. The question was no longer what made the Bloop. It was why nobody wanted to hear the answer. NOAA's ruling is specific. The Bloop is consistent with a cryoseism, an icequake, ice fracturing on an enormous scale. Based on the direction the sound arrived from, the icebergs that made it most likely sat between the Bransfield Strait and the Ross Sea, or at Cape Adare, a known source of these signals. Ice does not break all at once. It fails in sequence, generated, in NOAA's own words, by ice cracking and crack propagation. But if the answer was on the table in 2001, why did it take another decade to stick? To go back to that CNN interview, September of 2001. Christopher Fox, the man who found the Bloop, on the record, saying he thought it was ice carving in Antarctica. That was before the magazine piece, before the monster, before the sunken city. The answer arrived first. It arrived quietly from a careful man who called it a hunch, and almost nobody wrote it down. A hunch cannot compete with a Leviathan. By 2012, the consensus had caught up to him. NOAA now files the Bloop under a heading with no mystery in it at all: Icequakes. So here is what the Bloop actually is: not a creature, not a secret. It is the sound of Antarctica coming apart, loud enough to cross an ocean and reach a microphone built to listen for submarines. And NOAA notes something else. As the planet warms, icequakes are happening more often, not less. We spent a decade listening for a monster in that recording. The whole time, the ocean was telling us something far stranger. The ice has a voice. It carries farther than any animal alive, and we finally know how to hear it. The Bloop was never unexplained. It was only unwanted, and it is still out there, every season, saying the same thing at full volume to anyone willing to listen.